Alright people, here we go. We're going to be doing a CV axle replacement on a Nissan Juke. This is a 2013 Nissan Juke. Some things you're going to need, obviously a jack stand. You're going to want some flathead screwdrivers, maybe a pair of pliers, some extensions. This is a 16mm socket. You're going to want a 21mm socket and maybe a 21mm wrench. If you don't have two 21mm pieces, you can always, what you're going to be doing is using a ratchet there and just basically holding the other side. So you could use an adjustable wrench if you don't have, one of each. Because like I said, you're going to be, all the work's going to be done on one side and you're just going to be holding on to the other side really. If you have an impact gun, that'd be awesome. If you don't, you could always use some ratchets. I'd recommend using 1/2 inch and 3/8 drives for this job because it's going to be pretty hefty. As you can see in there, if I get my hand out of the light, there is the torn open boot of the CV axle, and we're going to be replacing the whole assembly because it's been ripped open for a while. It's been leaking for a while, and you want to replace the whole axle assembly. That's usually the best bet because it's worn out now because the grease has not been in there lubricating it. So I just remembered some other things you're going to need here. You're going to want a big old pin in order to tap this in with if you don't have success using a piece of wood and a hammer in order to tap it in, because you don't want, this could be seized and you want it to tap it in nicely so you don't damage anything on the other side of the axle when you're doing that. I just remembered you are definitely going to want a pair of pliers because of this cotter pin right here you're going to want to take out. And right here you can have some anti-seize. You're going to want to put it on the splines on both ends of the axles once you're installing. If there's anything else I left out, I'll put it towards the end or in the description. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do is disconnect this speed sensor wire over here. You're going to want to, let's get the focus a little bit better there. Alright, you're going to pull it off from this rubber portion here. Again, the rubber portion, you're going to want to pull it off from the back. You can see that you just push it out and push it in. Alright, next thing we're going to do, take this off. It's a 21mm. We're going to want to use the 21mm socket and ratchet on this side. That's what I would recommend doing, and then using the 21mm wrench on this side. Or, like I said, an adjustable works as well. Make sure you have it, tightened up there. And then you can just take it on like this. Now I can't do this holding the camera, so I'm going to take it off. You're going to want to do most of the work with this side and use this side just to hold it really. Alright, so you don't want to take these out, you just want to loosen them up because the one thing you definitely want to have done is taking this cotter pin out, loosening up this nut here before you get too far ahead. You want to bend the cotter pin. This is gonna have to use both hands on this probably. It's a big cotter pin, but you basically want to bend these back so that they're straight, so that it can go through this hole back out of this side. Like I said, the cotter pin's going to want to go in this way, so bend these so that it's straight. Once you have these sides straight, this cotter pin can just come out. Sometimes you can push it from the other side even if the cotter pin's straight enough. Next we're going to want to take this cap off. If you have trouble with it, it's probably because one of these pieces is bent on the outer portion. You see there where the hole is? It's bent just a little bit. We're going to want to make sure all of those are flush. You can see it's bent right there coming inward. It's going against the grains here, and it's not allowing this to come off. There you can see we just had one bent piece. It was right there, bent it up, and this piece the cap just comes right off. Alright, so you're definitely going to want to take off this axle nut right now. This is a 32mm, so you're going to want to use a 32mm impact socket. I have an impact gun, so I'm going to be able to take it off that way. If you don't have an impact gun, you're going to have to stop this rotor from spinning. This is going to want to spin around with the wheel, just like when you were taking the wheels off, you kept it on the ground to take it off once you had an impact gun because you needed friction, otherwise the wheel would spin with it when it's in the air. So you could get the same effect as over here by putting a screwdriver actually in the rotor and it's going to spin until it comes down. If the screwdriver is long enough, it can stop right there and stop the wheel from turning. You also can use the screwdriver over here somewhere if it fits properly and doesn't damage anything. Like for mine, just so happens to fit right in here, nice and snug, and it will go up against the caliper and not allow this to turn. Otherwise, it's going to try to turn, and it's going to just keep turning and turning and turning, and while you keep turning and turning this, and you'll just keep turning it forever. You have to have something to stop this from turning. Alright, this is the part where you're going to want the nut to come out to the very end, nice and flush, so that you don't damage the threads on this axle. Obviously here are the threads. You're going to want it nice and flush, like I said, because you're going to want to tap this to push the axle to go back a little bit to make sure that it's not seized in here in this knuckle. So like I said, put a piece of wood on here, nice and flush, tap it with a hammer, or unless you got a copper hammer or something like that, so that you don't damage anything on the other side that it's pushing into. So I'm just going to show you by tapping very lightly with this that it does go back, and this axle is free enough for me to work with. So I can leave this like so. Alright, this is a pretty good time to show you this, because you're going to have to do it now. With this loosened up, if you haven't loosened this up yet, do it now. Just have it loosened up. Don't take this out because you want this still intact for now. You can see down there, let's come around over here, you can see my ratchet is sitting in the way. Move. Alright, you can see that there's that bolt there that holds this axle in. There is another bolt down there that holds this axle in. And you can get both of them from underneath the vehicle. I'll show you. If you come over here, it's a lot easier to get them from underneath, because there's this big old panel right about there. You can see there's a bunch of grease all over it. This big old piece of junk right here, a lot of people would be looking at this thing right here thinking that they have to take it off in order to get this axle out. And there's only 3 bolts holding it on, so it's not that big of a deal, but you don't really have to take it out. Okay, I got the light on now. You can see the axle, there it is, torn open boot, stuff all over the place. My friend will love looking at this. Check this out. You can see this plate actually attaches right into the transmission, and you can get the bolts from underneath. Here I am under the car. This little beam in the way, but you can slip right past this beam, socket and ratchet, and you can actually, oh shoot, loosen it up. There's that, and you can get this one up top too. There. So you barely have enough room, so you can get it from here. So you don't have to get a long extension and come all the way from outside of the car, because you'll have a lot less leverage than you do here. Alright, still under the car here. Because we kept everything over down that way in place, these bolts, once you've loosened them up with the ratchet, will actually come out by hand, as you can see. And that's the easiest way to take them out, is down here with a ratchet to start, and then take them out by hand the rest of the way. You can always leave one in place a little bit while you take the rest of the other side out, so that this doesn't like pop out all over the floor. Some fluid may come out of this transmission when you loosen this up, and in fact I think on this car that does happen. A lot of the time these axles come out, and if you have it raised up on this side high enough, usually some won't come out. But so little suggestion, raise the vehicle up pretty high on the side you're working on, and it might stay more in here. But some fluid probably will come out when we do this, when we finally pop it all the way out. So I would recommend putting a pan on the ground for sure, and maybe some cardboard underneath that pan. Alright, the sun is starting to go down, so soon I might switch to you know, the flash function on my camera here. But I'm going to loosen this up a little bit on the top. Keep that top one in there. We're going to loosen up the bottom one, take the bottom one out, and then I'll show you the rest. Okay, now that I have that bottom one out, I've loosened up this top one, again like that axle nut over here that we did. where it's on the very, very end, nice and flush there, so we don't mess up the ends of the threads, because we're going to have to tap this a little bit to get it out if we're not working with impact tools. You can see it's not on there too tough now, so we can take this out. Again, you might want to use a punch or a pin or something like that. Put it on the end of this and tap it with that. You put this on here and then tap with the hammer here so that you don't damage these threads. Like I said, I'm confident that I won't be messing anything up, and for the sake of the video, I want to show you how this comes out. So, this is still a little bit tough to get out. I could wiggle this strut with one hand and pull with the other. I could tap with a punch on this side to push it the rest of the way out. Again, being careful of these threads. You don't want to force anything out of here. That's why I'd say get it out by hand if you can, wiggling this and pulling out. I'm going to put the camera down so I can do just that. Alright, so you're definitely going to want two hands for this next part. After you pull that out, I would recommend keeping these relatively close in place. That's obviously the one that's going to go on top. This is the one that's going to go on bottom. I like to remember which one they came from and put them back in the same place. That doesn't matter for every bolt you take out, but I figured those ones are pretty decent for that type of situation. So I'm going to pull. I wouldn't put your finger in here yourself at home, but you're going to want to pull this knuckle out from the steering column. Now we can take this out. Make sure it's still going to pop out there. And this axle should come out. We got the nut over here. The axle should come out. I'm gonna loosen up. Looks like the ABS line over here, possibly, to have to get this out all the way. Okay, so here we go. We got the light on now. I actually think it's set to auto because it just came on by itself. We're gonna take this axle out because we're prepping it. We're gonna put it somewhere safe. We're going to prep it, and we're going to keep this box ready because when this axle comes out, and it's about to come out, we're going to want to make sure that we put it somewhere so we don't make much of a mess, because it might have some fluid on the other end there. So this ABS line, we're not going to disconnect. We're just going to be careful with it because this CV axle is out. Alright, so some people, when taking this out, would come from over here and take out this pinch bolt and remove the ball joint and try to get it to come out this way. It does make it easier so you don't have to worry about this over here, but this to come out is usually a lot more difficult. It's usually going to fight you coming out, and this ball joint bushing can be damaged in the process of trying to do that, so it could give you more problems than you started with when you started the job. So we're going to pull this axle out. Obviously it's out. We're going to do some finagling around. Be careful of this ABS line. Like I said, you can bring the strut a little bit closer to you. There's a little give there. Don't pull and break stuff, but like I said, just be careful when pulling this out. We're going to come out to the right since we're on this passenger side of the vehicle over here. This is the side we're going to want to come out of because obviously there's nothing really here besides this. We may end up having to take this off to get enough space, but it's a lot easier than taking all this other stuff off. Okay, I'm going to attempt to do this with one hand, so hopefully it's not going to be too hard. The key to getting this in and out is this portion right here. You're going to try to get it around. So this caliper isn't even really a problem right now. Some procedures would call you to do that, but this lower control arm pushes downward. This strut pries a little bit outward. Yes, it's still connected to stuff. Don't pry too hard on everything, but if you do a combination of pulling everything the right way, you can pry this out, and now there's nothing stopping this from coming out. We just got to pull it out. Again, I'm going to try to do this with two hands, so it's going to be kind of hard to show you here. But you can see, by the way, this is an old axle. We don't really care about this much, but if you can see there, and try to focus more actually down in there, this clamp that's on further in that goes around this we want to free that up to get this actually to come out. So we're gonna actually pull, kind of almost like a slide hammer, but just kind of like pull it like this, and you'll notice, oh, it just popped right out. Yeah, if you just keep popping it a little bit like that, it'll, you know, kind of give it a couple good bangs. You'll see that it slides out. Okay, so I want to point out right now that the reason why we were able to pull this axle out in the way that we were is because, if you can see, there's actually a couple of balls there that keep the axle from pulling out completely, meaning that when you pull on the actual axle shaft itself, that I know that this particular axle won't separate at the joint. Sometimes you could have the problem where you pull on the shaft, and you pull on the shaft too hard trying to get it out, and you actually separate the shaft from the joint, and now the joint's stuck in there, and you got the shaft out, but now the joint's stuck. So what you got to do in those cases, if this is seized or it's stuck, you got to put a pry bar, maybe go underneath the vehicle, put a pry bar underneath this kind of reddish, orangish area here that kind of connects towards the transmission, and you want to, you know, pry it out this way. You want to pry it outward, out of the car. So you can slip something in between, you know, the transmission area and this little, you know, cylinder right here, and you can push it out that way. Sometimes you might have to, if it's really seized, put a pry bar on the end of it, not to pry with, but to actually tap it with a hammer to try to tap it out. In this case, these come out really nice and easy because of this clamp with those two bolts that, you know, holds it in there. When you remove those bolts on this car, this thing really should just slide right out because of the design. Other cars may not have this type of plate right here with these two bolts. It might literally be held in there with a C-clamp around the splines, and you actually will have to kind of pull with some force to get this out in those cases. But this isn't one of those axles, which is why we took it out the way that we did. It literally slid right out into my hand. You know, you didn't even have to do that, the pulling where it kind of pulls and taps at the same time like a slide hammer. I literally just needed to pull it out, and it slid right out into my hand. So again, I just wanted to point that out to you in case, for whatever reason, yours was seized, or if you take this procedure to a different vehicle. Okay, so this is a part where we're going to try to keep things a little bit clean. We have it draining into the pan. Luckily for us, it started going into the pan directly. You can, you know, go underneath and look up and see where it's supposed to come out of. I'm going to pull this all the way out. Put it in that box we prepped earlier. So that we don't make a big old mess. Okay, so unless we're actually replacing the fluid, we want to move relatively quickly so that we don't lose too much of it. We want to get some anti-seize here on the splines. You'll see all the way around there. Not too much, but you want this to be able to go on there and possibly come off further down the line. You know, if this ever needs to come out, it'll be something nice for the next person, you know. The next person might be you never know, so you want to do this sort of thing. Okay, so we're also going to put just a little bit of anti-seize, a small amount. This is more than we want. I'm going to take some of this off, but we want it to come all the way around here. And a light coat all the way around it, because this is what sometimes can hold it up from coming out. Because this was done properly the last time, this was able to come out relatively easy for us. We want the same thing to happen to the next person, if there is going to be a next person that has to do this job in the future. Starting to get darker, and also, like I said, we got some fluid coming out that we don't want too much to come out. It actually stopped, so I'm not really too worried about it, but oh boy, here we go. Sorry about that. So we're going to want to carefully slide this back through that opening area, and we're going to want it to go back into that hole there. We wanted to, well, I've checked it already. You'd normally want to obviously clean that off in case it has any residue on it. Because of the design that it is, that has stayed very clean. I didn't have to clean it off very much. Okay, so I've slid it relatively into its place down there. I'm going to go underneath the vehicle to actually help line it up properly. That spinning bearing over there, don't worry about that too much. You mainly want to just get it to slide in there properly and then hook up the splines over there on the transmission side. And we can take this nut off so that we can properly put this in. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is line up everything over here. We want this to get, push in a little further. The long rod with the splines on it, we're gonna want it to connect. As long as you have this going in straight, you'll be able to feel the splines go in. And once the splines are actually in, if you'll notice if you turn the axle, the actual axle itself, not this piece, that it'll have resistance on the other end, letting you know that it's actually attached to the other end. Then we're going to want to put in one of these bolts, probably this bottom one here. That way we can hold this in place. Then we're going to want to go to the other side, and we're going to want to hook it up to the knuckle again. Alright, so push the axle in all the way. I can feel it's connected to the splines. We want to now move this around so that it connects properly. We have a hole here on the other side. Putting our bolt in. Once this actually starts going in, I can move my hand out of the way for you. Once this actually starts going in a decent amount, don't put it in too far. Now that you know it's in, put the one in up top as well. You want to make sure they're both lined up. Otherwise, you'll end up having to take this off if they're not lined up properly. Alright, so I'll try to get the camera in a good spot. Putting in this top bolt is difficult, yes, but not impossible. From the bottom, I'm doing it here with one hand because I'm holding a camera with the other. So, as you are aware, it's in there. I'm going to screw it in a little bit easier with my other hand. So I'll have to turn this off, but you get the picture. It's in there, it's screwing in, and once we get them both in there a little bit, we'll actually want to hook up the other side back up to the steering knuckle before we tighten these all the way up. Alright, so I noticed on the other end of the axle when you're trying to put this in that you actually can pry this back out a little bit by accident, and in case you have difficulty with it, I don't want you to have that problem, so we're actually going to tighten this to at least hand tight over here. I'm just using the extension. It's just so that this doesn't pop out. We'll tighten this in a few seconds here. Alright, I'm gonna have to make the next few shots and clips a little bit short because my battery is starting to run low, and I think at 15% it doesn't let me use the flash anymore, and it's getting dark out. So this obviously might be the more difficult part of the job to some. Just finagling this to go back into this hole there. You're going to want to pull this and pry this back and get this all pushed down so that this can go around again. I'm going to give this one shot with one hand. I don't want to waste a lot of footage or battery life doing this, so I'm just going to give it the one shot. I'm going to come down from the bottom over here, slip this down under here. You can see it's almost there. Boom, got it. Alright, past that little threshold. Okay, now is the time you're going to want to do those two bolts further in there. You're going to want to tighten those two up, and you're going to want to get the splines all fitted. You might have to rotate this shaft a little bit to get it to fit with the splines in here a little bit. You're going to want to put this steering knuckle back up to the strut, and we're going to want to put those bolts in. Don't forget the bolt heads go in through here this way. Alright, so we're inside the vehicle right now. My battery actually did get too low to use the flash, but the rest of the job is very easy from here. You literally just put everything back on the way it came out. If you want some torque specifications, the axle nut where it meets with the wheel is 135 foot-pounds. The strut where it meets with the knuckle, those two bolts that are 21 millimeters are about 110 foot-pounds. The torque specifications for the axle with the two bolts that go into the transmission, those two bolts are 16 millimeters and they're 35 foot-pounds. I would not use an actual torque wrench on those two 35 foot-pound bolts because they are, that's a low torque spec. So you're going to hook up a powerful torque wrench that is not used to those lower increments and not accurate at those low increments, and you might accidentally over torque it and then break off the bolt. You don't want that. So if you're going to torque anything, just torque the axle nut and the the strut nuts, the two that connect the knuckle to the strut.